I'm gonna need you two to pack it up and leave, right now.
I'm sorry, on what grounds, officer?
Don't make this difficult. I said leave.
You sure you want to do this here, son?
Don't you dare reach into
Detective
that.
Sergeant Marcus Webb, Major Crimes Division, badge number 4471.
Detective Sergeant Darnell Carter, same division, and that man you just pointed out.
At exactly 7:42 in the morning on a quiet Tuesday in Harlow City, Georgia, inside a corner booth at Rosie's Classic Diner on 5th and Maple Street, a routine breakfast between two colleagues became one of the most talked about law enforcement incidents in the state's recent history. The diner's overhead security camera was rolling. The responding officer's body camera was clipped to his chest and recording every second. And in less than 9 minutes, a 14-year veteran of the Harlow City Police Department would make a decision that would cost him everything he had spent his entire career building. But this wasn't your typical police misconduct video. This was different. This wasn't a civilian being mistreated on a roadside. This wasn't someone being bullied in a parking lot. This was a uniformed patrol officer in full view of a crowded breakfast diner, attempting to remove two of his own department's most decorated detectives from a public establishment, for no reason other than the color of their skin. What happened next would shock the Harlow City Police Department from top to bottom, spark a federal review of the department's internal culture, and prove once and for all that racism doesn't check credentials before it shows its face. Before we continue, can you do me a favor? Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. And if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button right now. This story gets significantly more intense, and trust me, you do not want to miss what happens next. Character introduction. Marcus Webb was not your average 42-year-old. While most people his age were thinking about mortgages and weekend plans, Marcus Webb was running active surveillance on one of the largest drug trafficking networks in the southeastern United States. He had joined the Harlow City Police Department at the age of 22, fresh out of Georgia State University with a degree in criminal justice and a minor in constitutional law. He hadn't just studied law enforcement. He had studied the law itself, every amendment, every precedent, every protection afforded to citizens under the United States Constitution. By the time he was 30, Webb had already been promoted to detective. By 35, he had led the takedown of two major organized crime rings operating across 3 counties. By 40, he had been awarded the department's Medal of Valor, twice. He was known in the department as a man who never raised his voice, never lost his composure, and never, ever forgot a face. His clearance rate for homicide cases was 94%. One of the highest in the state, and in his 20 years on the force, he had filed exactly 0 disciplinary complaints against fellow officers. Not because he had never seen anything worth reporting, but because, until this morning, nothing had ever been quite this blatant. Darnell Carter was Webb's partner, his closest friend, and in many ways his mirror image. Also 42, also a Georgia State graduate, Carter had come to the department through a different route. He had spent 4 years in the United States Army Military Police before joining Harlow City PD at 26. Where Webb was methodical and precise, Carter was instinctive and quick. Between the two of them, they had over 35 combined years on the force. They had worked undercover operations in some of the most dangerous situations the department had ever authorized. They had sat across tables from murderers, traffickers, and gang leaders, men who would have killed them without hesitation if they had known who they really were. They knew how to stay calm, they knew how to read a room, and they both knew, the moment Officer Brian Kowalski walked through that diner door and looked in their direction, exactly what was about to happen. On the morning of Tuesday, March 14th, Marcus Webb and Darnell Carter had been awake since 5 a.m. They were in the final week of a 6-month undercover operation targeting a mid-level narcotics distribution ring operating out of the West Side district of Harlow City. That morning, they were dressed the way their cover required. Casual, nondescript, nothing that would draw attention. Webb wore dark jeans, a plain gray hoodie, and a pair of clean white sneakers. Carter wore similar. Dark joggers, a navy blue jacket, a baseball cap. No badges visible, no department insignia, no guns on their hips. Their weapons were holstered at their ankles, and their credentials were tucked inside their jacket pockets. They had chosen Rosie's Diner specifically because it was quiet in the early morning, close to the area where they needed to be by 9 a.m., and because Rosie's made the best coffee in the county, and they both needed it. They had slid into a corner booth at approximately 7:35 a.m. They ordered coffee and eggs. They opened a laptop between them and quietly reviewed surveillance notes from the night before. They were not loud. They were not disruptive. They were not arguing. They were not taking up space they weren't entitled to. They were two men having breakfast and doing their jobs. Everything was completely, entirely, unambiguously lawful. The diner was about half full, a few elderly couples near the window, a mother with 2 young children in the booth behind them, a group of construction workers at the counter. The smell of bacon and fresh coffee hung in the warm air. It was, by every possible measure, enter a completely ordinary Tuesday morning. Then the bell above the diner door rang. Marcus Webb looked up from the laptop. His eyes moved to the door the way a seasoned detective's eyes always move, automatically, instinctively, assessing in fractions of a second. Officer Brian Kowalski stepped into the diner in full uniform. Webb watched him scan the room. He watched Kowalski's eyes land on their booth. He watched the officer's expression shift. Webb didn't say anything. He looked back at the laptop. He picked up his coffee cup, and in a voice low enough that only Carter could hear, he said 3 words. "Here we go." Carter didn't look up. He just nodded once and took a slow sip of his coffee. Marcus Webb's pulse didn't race with panic. It raced with recognition. Officer Brian Kowalski was a 14-year veteran of the Harlow City Police Department, assigned to the 3rd Precinct Patrol Division. He was 38 years old, broad-shouldered, with the kind of permanent scowl that suggested he found most of the world personally irritating. He had received 3 commendations during his career, all for traffic-related enforcement. He had also received 7 documented complaints from members of the public, 6 of which alleged racially biased conduct. All 7 had been reviewed internally. All 7 had been dismissed without disciplinary action. This was, for Officer Kowalski, simply a Tuesday morning patrol. This was routine, or so he thought. Kowalski walked the length of the diner slowly, his thumbs hooked into his belt. He stopped at the booth where Webb and Carter were sitting. He stood there for a moment without saying anything, looking down at them the way someone looks at a problem they've already decided how to solve. "Morning," Kowalski finally said. His tone did not carry the warmth that word is typically associated with. Webb looked up. "Morning, officer. You 2 been here long?" "About 10 minutes, Carter said, without looking up from the laptop. Kowalski looked at the laptop, he looked at the coffee cups, he looked at the 2 men. "What are you boys doing in here?" The word boys landed in the air like a stone dropped into still water. Webb set his coffee cup down very carefully. "We're having breakfast, officer." "Uh-huh." Kowalski pulled out a small notepad, the kind patrol officers carry for field notes. He clicked his pen. "I'm going to need some ID from both of you." Carter finally looked up. "For having breakfast? I'm not going to ask again." This is where things started to go wrong for Officer Kowalski, because the 2 men sitting in that booth were not nervous. They were not scrambling for their wallets. They were not stuttering or apologizing or trying to de-escalate out of fear. They were watching him, calmly, professionally, the way people watch someone who is making a very serious mistake and doesn't know it yet. Webb leaned back in the booth slightly. "Officer, on what legal basis are you requesting our identification? We're seated in a public establishment, we've made a purchase, and we haven't violated any law. Under Georgia state law, a law enforcement officer must have reasonable, articulable suspicion of criminal activity to demand identification. So I'll ask again, what is the legal basis for your request?" Kowalski's jaw tightened. The manager called it in. "Called what in? Specifically?" "Said there were 2 suspicious individuals in the establishment." Carter clasped his hands on the table and looked at Kowalski with the calm, patient expression of a man who has heard every version of this sentence before. "Suspicious how?" Kowalski didn't answer that. "Officer," Webb continued, his voice never rising above a conversational tone, "I'd like you to think carefully about your next action here, because what you are doing right now, approaching 2 men who are committing no crime in a public establishment and demanding their identification without legal basis, that is a violation of our 4th Amendment rights. And I want to be very clear with you. We know that." Kowalski leaned forward slightly. "You know what? I've been doing this job for 14 years. I don't need a lecture from who?" Carter said. The diner had gotten quieter. The construction workers at the counter had stopped talking. The mother with the 2 children was watching. The elderly couples near the window were watching. Rosie herself, a stout woman in her 60s who had owned this diner for 30 years, had come out from behind the counter and was standing near the register, watching. Kowalski straightened up. "I'm going to need you 2 to pack it up and leave. Right now." "I'm sorry. On what grounds, officer?" "Don't make this difficult. I said leave." And this is the moment. This is the exact moment the body camera footage captures in perfect clarity, because what Officer Brian Kowalski said next, and the way he said it, would be played in courtrooms, reviewed by investigators, broadcast on television, and studied in law enforcement ethics courses for years to come. "This is a respectable establishment," Kowalski said, dropping his voice. "And I think the people in here would be a lot more comfortable if you 2 took your business somewhere else." There it was. Not a legal argument, not a public safety concern, not even a pretense of procedure. Just the plainest, most naked expression of what this had always been about. Webb and Carter looked at each other. 20 years of partnership communicated in a single glance. Carter reached slowly into the inside pocket of his jacket. "Don't you dare reach into that," Kowalski started. The badge came out. It hit the table with a clean, flat, metallic sound that cut through every conversation in that diner like a fire alarm. Detective Sergeant Darnell Carter, Carter said, his voice completely level. Major Crimes Division, Harlow City Police Department, badge number 5U192. I have been with this department for 16 years. Kowalski went very still. Webb's badge was already on the table beside Carter's. Detective Sergeant Marcus Webb, same division, badge number 4471, 20 years on this force. He paused. And the man sitting across from me? He currently holds the rank of Detective Sergeant First Class, which, if you check your department organizational chart, Officer Kowalski, is 4 pay grades above yours. The color drained from Brian Kowalski's face so completely and so quickly that the woman at the nearest table later told investigators she genuinely thought he was about to faint. Quick question for you watching. Have you ever been in a situation where someone made an assumption about you that was completely wrong, and then had to watch them realize their mistake in real time? Drop a comment below. I read every single one. Webb picked up his coffee cup again. He took a slow sip. He looked up at Kowalski over the rim of the cup. Now, I'm going to ask you one more time, and I'd like you to think very carefully before you answer. You said the manager called in 2 suspicious individuals. Would you like to go ask the manager to point out which 2 individuals they were referring to? Because I'd be very interested in that conversation. Kowalski said nothing. He couldn't. His body camera was still recording. Everything he said from this point forward would be on record. He knew that. And from the look on his face, he had just realized, fully, completely, and with absolute certainty, exactly how much trouble he was in. We're going to finish our breakfast, Carter said, and then we're going to complete our workday. And then, Officer Kowalski, we're going to have a much longer conversation about what happened here this morning. You have a good day now. Kowalski turned and walked out of the diner without another word. The entire diner was silent for 3 full seconds. Then Rosie, from behind the counter, started a slow clap. By the time it reached the construction workers, the whole room had joined in. Marcus Webb looked at Darnell Carter. Darnell Carter looked at Marcus Webb. Carter picked up his fork. "Your eggs are getting cold," he said. Webb smiled for the first time all morning. "Yeah," he said. "They are." The eggs got cold anyway, because neither man ate them. Within 4 minutes of Kowalski leaving the diner, Webb had his phone out and was typing a detailed, time-stamped account of the encounter into a secure department document. Carter was doing the same thing simultaneously on the laptop that was still open between them. They were not angry, or at least, they were not performing anger. They were precise, they were methodical, they were building something, and they both knew it. "You get his badge number?" Carter asked, not looking up from the screen. "Already have it," Webb said. "Body cam was running the whole time. I saw the indicator light." "Good." Carter closed the laptop. He looked out the window at the street where Kowalski's patrol car was visible, still parked at the curb. "You know what gets me?" he said quietly. Webb waited. "We've been working undercover for 6 months, Carter said. We've been in situations where actual criminals, people who hurt people for a living, looked at us and treated us with more basic human respect than that man did just now." Webb didn't respond immediately. He looked down at his coffee cup. Then he looked up. "That's the file entry I'm going to use," he said. "That's the line." They paid their bill, left a generous tip, and walked out of Rosie's diner at 8:09 a.m. The encounter had lasted exactly 27 minutes from the time Kowalski entered the diner to the time they walked out. 27 minutes that would end a career, trigger a federal review, and change Harlow City's police department in ways that are still unfolding today. Now, most people who experience what Marcus Webb and Darnell Carter experienced that morning might file an informal complaint, mention it to a supervisor, or let it quietly disappear into the enormous pile of incidents that never get properly addressed. But Marcus Webb and Darnell Carter were not most people, and they did not do any of those things. By 11 a.m. that same Tuesday morning, Webb had submitted a formal internal affairs complaint against Officer Brian Kowalski that was 14 pages long. 14 pages, single-spaced, with section headers, subsections, citations of specific department policy violations, citations of relevant case law, a timeline of the encounter broken down minute by minute, a list of civilian witnesses with their booth locations in the diner noted for cross-reference with the surveillance footage, and a formal request that the diner's security camera footage be preserved immediately and entered into evidence. Carter filed a separate, equally detailed complaint that reached 11 pages and arrived in the Internal Affairs Office 23 minutes after Webb's. The Internal Affairs Division of the Harlow City Police Department had been operating for decades. Sergeant Linda Okafor, who had run the division for 6 years, later told investigators she had received thousands of complaints during her tenure. She said she had never, not once in 6 years, received a complaint from a fellow officer that was this thorough, this precise, or this legally airtight. When I read the first page of Detective Webb's complaint, she said in a later deposition, I knew this wasn't going to follow normal channels. I closed my door, I read the entire thing straight through, and then I picked up the phone and called the chief. The Harlow City Police Department received both complaints at 11:47 a.m. By 2:15 p.m. the same day, less than 3 hours later, Officer Brian Kowalski had been placed on administrative desk duty, his patrol assignment suspended, and an emergency review panel had been convened. This was not normal. These processes typically take weeks just to schedule. The fact that it moved this fast told everyone in the department one thing. Whatever was in those complaints was not dismissible. It was not ignorable, and it was not going away. Do you think the department responded fast enough, or do you think it only moved quickly because the victims happened to be fellow officers? Let me know in the comments, because that question is at the center of everything that comes next. Sergeant Okafor pulled Officer Kowalski's personnel file the same afternoon. What she found inside that file confirmed what Webb and Carter had suspected: the 7 previous complaints, all dismissed, all alleging the same pattern of racially biased conduct. 2 of the complaints had come from business owners in the same district who reported that Kowalski had pressured them to call in suspicious persons reports on black customers. 2 of them. The complaints had been filed separately by people who didn't know each other, describing incidents 8 months apart, and they had both been closed without investigation. Okafor then pulled the body camera footage from that morning. She watched it once. Then she called in her deputy, Marcus Hendricks, and watched it again. Then they called in the department's legal counsel, attorney Patricia Sims, and all 3 of them watched it a third time. After the third viewing, Hendricks later told the review board, Patricia turned to me and said, "This isn't an internal matter anymore." And she was right. The footage confirmed every detail in both complaints. It confirmed that Kowalski had made no attempt to identify a specific legal basis for his request. It confirmed the use of the word boys. It confirmed the statement about the establishment being respectable and people being more comfortable. It confirmed that no manager had actually approached Kowalski or directed his actions at any point, meaning the claim that a manager called in a report was either fabricated or dramatically misrepresented. And it confirmed one additional detail that neither Webb nor Carter had mentioned in their complaints, because they couldn't have seen it from inside the diner. The body camera footage, once enhanced by the department's technical unit, showed Officer Kowalski sitting in his patrol car outside Rosie's diner for 11 minutes before he entered. Just sitting, watching the window. He had not responded to a dispatch call. He had not received a report over his radio. He had parked, looked through the window of the diner, seen 2 black men in a booth, and then gone inside. Nobody called him. Nobody reported anything. He chose to go in on his own. That single detail, those 11 minutes, turned a misconduct investigation into something considerably more serious. The full investigation took 19 days. For a formal misconduct investigation involving a tenured officer, that is extraordinarily fast. Most take a minimum of 60 days just to move past the preliminary stage. But the evidence in this case was so complete, so clearly documented, and so thoroughly corroborated by multiple independent sources that there was simply no ambiguity left to investigate. The department's review board, the city's independent oversight committee, and the office of the state attorney general had all been provided copies of the body camera footage, the diner security footage, both formal complaints, and Kowalski's personnel history, including all 7 prior complaints. Everything was documented, everything was on camera, everything was undeniable. The review board's official findings were released in a formal statement on April 2nd. The board found that Officer Kowalski had engaged in racially discriminatory conduct in violation of department policy, city ordinance, and the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. The board found that he had made a materially false statement by claiming a manager had called in a suspicious persons report when no such report existed. The board found that his prior complaint history, combined with the witness accounts from this incident, demonstrated a pattern of targeted racially biased enforcement that was not isolated or accidental. And the board found that the previous 7 complaints against him had been improperly dismissed without adequate investigation. A finding that opened a separate inquiry into the supervisors who had signed off on those dismissals. The board recommended immediate termination. Officer Brian Kowalski resigned before the formal termination could be processed. His letter of resignation was 2 sentences long. His 14-year career with the Harlow City Police Department ended on a Tuesday afternoon. 19 days after the morning, he walked into Rosie's diner and told 2 of the department's most decorated detectives to leave because he thought they were nobody. The department initially attempted to handle the matter entirely through internal channels. There was no press release, there was no statement. The resignation was processed quietly, and the review board's findings were filed in the department's internal records system. For about a week, it looked like this story might simply disappear. Then Rosie did something nobody expected. Rosie Tatum, 64 years old, owner of Rosie's Classic Diner, mother of 3, grandmother of 5, and a woman who had spent 30 years watching her neighborhood change around her, posted the diner's security camera footage to her personal Facebook page at 9:30 on a Thursday night with a single caption. The caption read, "This happened in my diner. These 2 men are heroes. The officer who did this is gone. Share this so people understand what we deal with every single day." By Friday morning, the post had been shared 40,000 times. By Friday evening, it had been picked up by 3 local television stations. By Saturday morning, it was on national news. By Sunday, the footage had been viewed over 18 million times across every major social media platform. Legal analysts on YouTube broke it down frame by frame. Retired police officers commented on the procedural violations. Law school professors shared it with their classes as a real-time case study in Fourth Amendment rights and police accountability. Civil rights organizations issued statements. The mayor's office issued a statement. The governor's office issued a statement. Some people praised Webb and Carter for maintaining their composure and handling the situation with professionalism and precision. Others argued that it was deeply troubling that the situation only resulted in accountability because the victims happened to be law enforcement officers themselves, and that thousands of people who experience exactly the same treatment have no badges to put on the table. Some said Kowalski was a bad apple. Others said his 7-complaint history and the fact that every single one of those complaints had been dismissed pointed to something far more systemic than one bad officer. Some praised the department for acting quickly. Others pointed out that the department had had 7 opportunities to act over the previous several years and had chosen every single time not to. But here is what nobody, not a single person across all 18 million views, could honestly dispute. Marcus Webb and Darnell Carter were right about everything, every word, every citation, every claim, every detail. The Harlow City Police Department announced a series of institutional changes in the weeks following the investigation. Mandatory implicit bias training was made a requirement for all officers, including supervisors and command staff. The internal affairs complaint review process was overhauled, with new protocols requiring that any complaint alleging racially biased conduct receive an automatic secondary review by an independent examiner rather than being handled exclusively by the supervising officer's chain of command. All 7 previously dismissed complaints against Kowalski were reopened and reinvestigated. 3 of the supervisors who had signed off on those dismissals received formal disciplinary action. 1 retired early. The department also, and this was perhaps the most significant change, formally revised its policy on suspicious persons reports, requiring that any officer who responds to such a report must document in writing, on body camera, the specific articulable facts that constitute reasonable suspicion before making contact with any individual. Essentially, they made their officers do exactly what Marcus Webb had asked Brian Kowalski to do in that diner booth. State it clearly, justify it legally, out loud, on record, before you take any action. After the footage went viral, 4 other individuals came forward with accounts of encounters with Officer Kowalski that matched the same pattern. A college student who had been sitting in his car outside a library. A small business owner who had been unloading inventory from a van outside his own store. A pastor who had been walking home from an evening service. A retired school teacher who had been waiting for a bus. None of them had filed formal complaints at the time. Some said they hadn't believed it would matter. Some said they had been afraid. All 4 of them, after seeing the footage, reached out to the Harlow City NAACP chapter within the same week. This raises a question that I want you to sit with for a moment. How many of those encounters, the ones where the person on the receiving end doesn't have a badge to put on a table, how many of those simply vanish? How many go undocumented, uninvestigated, and unchanged? How many Brian Kowalskis are still out there, still patrolling, still filing suspicious persons reports that were never called in because the person they stopped had no way to prove who they were beyond who they simply undeniably already were? Marcus Webb and Darnell Carter completed their undercover operation successfully 2 weeks after the diner incident. The narcotics ring they had spent 6 months investigating was dismantled in a coordinated arrest operation that resulted in 23 arrests and the largest drug seizure in Harlow City history. Both men received departmental commendations for the operation. Webb was promoted to lieutenant later that year, making him one of the highest-ranked officers in the Major Crimes Division. Carter was offered a position as a trainer in the department's newly restructured Officer Conduct and Ethics program, a program that, in no small irony, uses the footage from Rosie's diner as its opening case study. Neither man gave media interviews after the footage went viral. Neither made a public statement beyond a joint written release, which read in full, We are grateful the department took this matter seriously. We hope this case serves as a reminder that accountability is not the enemy of good policing. It is the foundation of it. As of today, Brian Kowalski is no longer in law enforcement. He has not returned to the field in any capacity. His post-certification, the state credential required to work as a law enforcement officer in Georgia, was placed under review by the State Peace Officer Standards and Training Council following the findings of the internal investigation. The outcome of that review has not been made public. Rosie's Diner is still open. The corner booth where Webb and Carter were sitting has a small framed photo on the wall beside it now. It shows the two men in their suits, badges visible, taken on the day Webb was promoted. Rosie put it there herself. She says it stays there permanently.